Why is it that fruit can be seen as such a problematic food for those of us dealing with Crohn's and colitis? There's a few reasons for this. The first of all is fibre. A lot of fruit contains a lot of fibre, and fibre is seen as problematic for a lot of people because it's often something that could be quite difficult to tolerate, and it can often be the thing that presents us with symptoms. Another point is around urgency and flares. So, because of the fiber content, it can often lead to urgency. And in some people, if your gut is already in a pretty fragile state, that can lead into a flare. So, that can often lead people to thinking that fruit is actually quite problematic for the gut. And alongside these, there's also the issues around bloating. So, because fruit contains quite a lot of water and fiber, again, it can cause bloating in some people, and that can lead them into essentially avoiding it because they see it as a problematic food. And then once you've experienced, or once someone experiences problems like this, it's often hard to shake that experience. And it tends to then be something that that person will try to avoid in future so as to not get the same effects from it, like the bloating, like the urgency. So this creates food anxiety. And then once you start looking deeper into it on the internet, you find a whole host of different reasons not to eat fruit. And that advice can be quite conflicting with some of the evidence-based research that actually shows that fruit is quite beneficial for both the gut and our overall health. A, because of the nutrients, and B, because of the fiber that it also contains. There's a few reasons why tolerance to fruit changes depending on the person and depending on the state of their gut. So one of the first things to consider is the ripeness of the fruit. Generally, fruits that are less ripe can be harder to digest. Although there is a caveat to this, things like green bananas do have more resistant starch, and that resistant starch is more beneficial for the gut. However, it can be more difficult to process. So as that fruit ripens, the resistant starch breaks down into more simple sugars. This softens the fruit and this makes it easier to digest. Structures of fruit also differ and can have their own impact on how well they are digested. So, for example, when we look at something like a banana, it mashes up into something very soft and almost something that resembles baby food. And baby food is specifically designed like that because it's easy to digest. When we start adding other compounds of fruit, so things like skins and seeds, they often don't digest very well, and in a gut that's inflamed, that can present symptoms like bloating and urgency. So the actual structure of the fruit matters quite a lot as well. Then you've got the quantity. So how much fruit are you having at any one time? Having one apple is different to having a smoothie with 10 different fruits in. So the quantity at any one time that one person consumes has quite a big impact on how well their gut can tolerate it. And generally, if you're used to tolerating fruit, you can tolerate more at once. But if it's something that you have on an occasion, then it can be more problematic when you're eating larger quantities of fruit. And then you've also got how you consume these fruits. So, again, the raw state of a fruit is quite different to how it will be digested if it's blended. For things like bananas, this doesn't make too much of a difference, but any of those more problematic fruits, like those with skins on, so like blueberries, grapes, things like that, or those with seeds, which would also be grapes, dragon fruit, things like that, they are the things that are probably going to be easier if you're blending them. So again, whether you're having them in their raw state or in their blended state will also have quite a big impact on how easy they are for you to digest them. Now, in order to mitigate the problematic side of digesting fruit, there's a few things that you can do. The first is to pick specifically easy to digest fruits and use them as your staple so that if ever you are going through a little bit of a rougher phase, you can rely on these fruits no matter what. And for me, that tends to be bananas. And most people I've spoken to and worked with, bananas tends to be the number one purely because they're so simple, they're so soft, and there's nothing really problematic in them. There might be an element of having to wait until they're more ripe so that they're easier to digest. But again, green bananas are perfectly healthy, and if you can tolerate them, they're a great addition. So picking the fruit that you work best with is always a good start. Secondly, you can look at doing smoothies. So smoothies are a great way to blend multiple fruits, and they're a great way to mitigate some of the effects of fruits that have things like skins and seeds. Not only that, but blending also allows you to mix other things with it. So sometimes, because fruit travels quite quickly through the gut, having something more substantial with it, like quite a high fat source, can actually slow down the motility. So something like peanut butter can be very useful when adding to a smoothie. And you can also have the option then of adding some green leaves like spinach as well. So smoothies are a great way of getting fruits in that maybe you wouldn't be able to tolerate if they were raw. Then you've got stewed fruit. So stewed fruit is essentially cooking them down. So this can be great for making homemade jams, or it can be great for making homemade sauces, but stewing fruit and cooking it down again softens it, breaks it down, and makes it much easier to tolerate than if it's in its raw state. And then you've got smaller portions. So by focusing on smaller portions rather than giant bowls of fruit, you can pinpoint which fruits give you the most issues, but equally, if you're going through a sensitive phase, just taking a little bit of fruit each day at a time is better than nothing. So using portion sizes is also a great way of managing any sort of symptoms from fruit. And then you've got timing. So I tend to consume most of my fruit early in the day. A, because of the water content. I don't want to be going to the toilet when I'm going to sleep at night. But B, I just find that fruit digests much easier on an empty stomach than if I'm having it after hot food. So for me, timing matters. And I tend to have fruit earlier in the day. And I've worked with a lot of people who also tend to prefer that way and get on with that. So fruit earlier in the day is definitely something I would recommend. And then also seeing just what works for you. So you can work this out for yourselves, but maybe eating within certain times of meals. So maybe if you leave it an hour after eating food, then consuming fruit, you might notice that it's easier to digest than if you're eating it straight after. Now, symptom tracking is always useful because it allows you to pinpoint where the issues are. So I always recommend just keeping a log of your food, keeping a log of your symptoms, and that will allow you to start pinpointing where some of these issues are. So food tracking is always going to be valuable in this context of trying to figure stuff out. So the lesson here is that context matters. Don't be afraid of one single food group, especially something like fruit, because it's so well researched, it's so well documented, all the health benefits. And although there's a lot of scaremongering online about sugar content and fiber and things like this, generally all of those are overstated and overblown. So we do want to be including fruit in our diet. It's fairly essential for its nutrients, and it's a great way of ensuring that you're quite hydrated and that you're getting lots of the nutrients needed to mitigate a lot of the issues that come with a condition like Crohn's and colitis. So try not to be afraid of a whole food group. Use your tracking to figure out what might be going wrong. And if you're still stuck, please do drop me a message on my website. I'd be happy to sit down and work with you to figure out your gut issues and to figure out how we can get you past this barrier of having to exclude a whole food group. It's about working with your gut and not listening to the noise that seems to be everywhere, demonizing every food group. See you on the next one.